Hello, I'm Anthony. Today we're going to talk about a couple of features in Cubase, the project logical editor and macros. We're dealing with these two subjects in one because they're functionally very closely related, and they both concern themselves with automating operations inside Cubase itself, the application. You can execute almost any command in Cubase remotely, and we use these two functions to do that via keyboard shortcuts and automated processes. If you find this video useful and you'd like to help support my channel, check out the Patreon and channel member links below. Great way to do that. Now, just before we go any further, a quick note about the two logical editors in Cubase. A couple of weeks ago, I made a video where I discussed the process logical editor. Well, technically speaking, that's just called the logical editor. Those are the only words that you'll see in the menu. I stick the word process in front of it, which is just a thing that I do because that's historically from the key commands menu. When you have a look in the key commands, you can see process logical preset. So I call it the process logical editor. Strictly speaking, that word is a verb, but I'm using it as a noun. The other logical editor is the project logical editor. So it's got this extra word kind of tagged in. That's the one we're going to be discussing today. It's accessed from the project menu, project logical editor, and this sees the entire application. The project logical editor can perform operations as if it was the user. It can interact with Cubase, it can move locators and press record, and basically do anything that you can as a user. The second thing I want to discuss is the difference between the logical editor and macros. The project logical editor is condition based. If this and this or this, then do something. It could be one operation, it could be multiple operations. Macros can perform multiple complex operations in exactly the same way that the project logical editor can do, but they're not condition based. So a macro is best used when you want to say, do these things, do these 5 things, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But as you'll see today, they're very closely related and almost interchangeable. You can execute macros from inside the project logical editor, and you can execute project logical editor commands from inside macros. Now, in the sister video to this one, where I talked about the MIDI or process logical editor, I described how we set up logical operations and the basic functionality of the editor itself. I don't propose to cover that again today. Check out the video above if you want to basically get an overview of what logical editors are. We're just going to dive into examples of the kinds of things that you can do. And I'm going to start off with one of my own user presets. We'll go on to have a look at a couple of factory presets in a moment where the slightly more complex operations are being performed. But I want to start with something that's really nice and simple. I'm going to select this preset called Rename Multiple Tracks, and guess what it's going to do? Let's say I've got these 4 MIDI tracks down here, and as you can see, very simple labels, MIDI 1, 2, 3, 4. I want to call these Harmony 1, 2, 3, 4. So I want to rename them. Maybe I've recorded a 4-part harmony. So let's have a look at how the logical editor is set up. Firstly, we're only dealing with selected entities. Well, I've selected the 4 tracks, so we're all good to go. But this second criterion is where the good stuff is. Container type is equal to, and you can see that we've got folders, tracks, parts, and events. So MIDI is contained in parts. These are MIDI parts, and pretty much everything else is events. Automation are events. Audio are stored in events. Even markers are events. But here we're dealing with tracks, so we're only looking for selected tracks. And then we have this transform action. So down at the bottom of the logical editor, you can see that this is a transform action. We're going to do something. We're going to perform an operation. And what we're going to do is generate a name on the selected tracks. Now this parameter 1 is the basic name that's going to be assigned to the tracks. And you can see I've already typed in the word harmony, but you can choose anything you want there. This is basically like a template. The second parameter is going to be an ordinal number that's going to be assigned to each one of those tracks. So if I choose the number 1 and click apply, now it's renamed each one of those tracks. Here's the base stub, and here's the optional extra number that gets added onto the end of each track. So obviously this transform action is operating on the name. Here are all the different things that you can do to the name. If we wanted to change the action target, for instance, we could change the color automatically to a fixed value. And here's my standard project template, color template. So if I wanted to recolor all of these to vocal tracks, for instance, I can do it this way. I'm not saying this is the easiest way to perform this operation. Everything is context-based, but as you can see, it basically can perform any operation that can be executed inside the application. Let's have a look at another example from my user presets folder. Let's say mass automation update. So this time we have a new filter target of media type. What are the different kinds of media that we can be considering? Well, here we are, automation. You can see that Project Logical Editor can pretty much do everything that the other logical editor can do, because we could set the media type to MIDI. But here we're dealing with the automation. It's a much wider view of the application. Again, we're looking for selected events. And what are we going to do? We're going to trim all of the values. So we're basically going to truncate the automation. Let's have a look at the automation, the volume automation on this track. I'll select some data. So I could go up to the top of this selected zone and pull it down. That's the operation I'm going to be performing, but I'm going to be performing it via the automated route. And there you can see all the events coming down. Just undo all of those steps. So any conceivable operation that you can imagine performing in Cubase, you're highly likely to be able to find an equivalent somewhere in this absolute mass of options. Let's have a look at another example. This time I'm going to choose the delete selected and muted events. So this is basically one of those operations where I'm combining multiple different simple operations into one holistic view. To make a tiny bit more sense out of it, I'll just duplicate the audio track, and let's say I've muted some audio parts and I've been deciding how I'm going to work with this audio track, and I've got that kind of thing. So I've chosen the audio that I want to keep, and now as I've been auditioning and listening to all of these audio events, I've muted a load of stuff that I don't want to hear. So here I am at the end of the editing process. I'm happy with all of the mutes that I've made. I've listened to the whole thing. I could now go through and delete each one of these audio events individually, or I could select all of the audio events that I'm interested in, and I'm going to say, is the media type audio? Yes, it is. Is it selected? Yes, it is. Is it muted? Half of these events are muted. What's going to happen to it? They're going to get deleted. Go. And now it's performed that operation in one single hit. Can you also see that in the context of a delete operation, there are no transforms to be performed? Transform doesn't make any sense. It has no context in a delete operation. In fact, I actually think there's an application bug here, because if you choose deselect, again, there shouldn't be a transform operation to perform on a deselect. You're simply deselecting stuff according to various criteria, and yet the transform action box is highlighted again, allowing me to perform insert operations. I don't think it should be. I think it basically, with selects and deletes, it's disabled, but it looks like deselect's being added at a later date and somebody's forgotten to disable this box. Anyway, let's move on. Factory presets, drill into automation, and let's select delete all automation of selected track after cursor. So this time we're operating exclusively on media types automation, but this time we're only interested in stuff that's beyond the cursor. And this time we have a property is set. Let's have a look at parameter 1. Parent object is selected. The parent object of automation is the track on which that data lives. So the track is selected, and now if I click apply, watch all of this automation after the cursor, it's all gone. Note that the MIDI part in which the automation lives is not its parent. If I choose these MIDI parts and then select a different track, when I click apply, the parent object isn't the part. That might seem counterintuitive. Now, all of these examples so far have been self-contained. If these conditions are met, then do this thing. But you can also tag on pre and post commands, other operations that have to be performed before or after the primary thing that you're checking for. Now, the example I've chosen to show you for this is in the editors section, the top one, the top selection in the factory presets editors. It's a ridiculous example, but it does illustrate all of the points that I want to make. And it's called Open Key Editor for parts under the cursor on tracks containing string in the name. Have you ever come across anything so ridiculous? Now, we don't have any tracks in our project with the word string in the name. So I'm going to change this to the word groove. And now it's going to do exactly what it says. It's going to open the key editor for the Groove Agent track. I don't need to have the Groove Agent track selected. I don't need to have any Groove Agent parts selected. The logical editor is going to do all of the work for us. So let's see how. The first thing that it's going to do is deselect everything in the project. This is a necessary prerequisite in order for something that's going to happen later, but basically take it as read that we've deselected everything in the project. Now we're looking for container type track. The media type has to be MIDI. Okay, so we've only got one MIDI track here. I'm going to shrink this condition a little bit so that we can see at the end. And the name of the track contains the word groove. What's going to happen? That track's going to get selected. So all of those operations are there just to select the Groove Agent track. Once it's been selected, we're going to enter the post-process phase. And now we're going to enter the edit options and select events under the cursor. So it's going to select this MIDI part. Then we're going to go into the editors menu and we're going to open the key editor in a window. So we're going to basically pop up a window, open the key editor, and you'll see these MIDI events. Let's do all of that. So here's our key editor. Here's the MIDI part that's been selected. Groove Agent track's been selected. Operations being performed. And here are my MIDI notes. In this particular case, with only a single track open, obviously a fairly ridiculous example, but in larger projects, I can imagine it being easier to open the logical editor, type in here, I don't know, trumpet, and then let Cubase find it for you and open it in a key editor all in one. So those are examples of conditional operations. Now let's have a look at macros. Macros are found in the key commands section, so go to edit key commands. Down at the bottom of the key commands window, we see our macros. I personally don't like that they're here. I think they should have their own editing window, but it's not the end of the world. And here you can see some macros that I've defined. I'll make all of these macros available to my patrons and channel members. You'll be able to download these and see the kind of the examples that I'm working with today. And I'm going to open the first macro in this list to show you an example of something. I use this function all the time. It's really, really useful. I've got 3 variants of them, but delete loose doubles is my favorite. Let's open it and have a look what's going on here. I'm going to set up a quick example. I'll come back to this window in a moment. I'm going to set up an example of the kind of thing that we're looking for. So here I've got my MIDI part. I'm going to create a new note and I'm going to turn grid off and then move the A#2 very slightly. So as you can see, it's starting 3 ticks before A2. Now I'm going to move A#2 down above A2. So those 2 notes are 3 ticks apart, but more or less exactly the same. You have to zoom in really tight to even see that there's a second note there. This is the kind of thing that can happen if you're recording in cycle mode and you press the same key twice. You get 2 instances of that key, more or less at exactly the same point. You can also get it where you merge multiple tracks together and each of those tracks have a note that's very nearly identical but not quite. How do you delete that double? Delete doubles doesn't work. Delete doubles only works if both of the notes are at exactly the same point. This is what my macro does. It's going to get rid of one of those notes for me. And here's how we do it. The first thing that we need to do is freeze the quantize of all of these notes. So I might have quantized them previously and some of the notes might have been moved quite a long way. As you're going to see later, I need to be able to undo quantize operations. So I'm going to lock everything in place and I need to understand, how this process works and the fact that inside this macro, I am freezing the MIDI, but that's what I'm going to do. So now all of these notes have been locked in place and they're 3 ticks apart. The next thing that I'm going to do, regardless of what the quantize level is currently set to, I'm going to set it to 30 seconds. These are all options selectable in your key commands window. That's why macros are so closely linked with key commands. They hang off them. And so here we can see all the various quantize category options, and there is one called set quantize to 30 seconds. There it is. The next thing I do is to quantize all of the notes. So that's now going to move those 2 notes so they're exactly on the bar. Then I can perform delete doubles. Here's the MIDI delete doubles operation that I actually want to execute. After I've executed that command, one of those notes is going to have disappeared. Now I execute reset quantize Any notes that weren't already on the bar, got a natural groove that's been played in on this MIDI part. I don't want to quantize the part. I only want to delete the doubles. So I'm going to undo that quantize operation that I performed here. This quantize is going to get undone with that reset. So now all of the notes are back where they used to be. And finally, I tidy up my quantize. I don't want quantize to be set to 30 seconds. This is the option I've chosen. This is what I'm working with in my project. And so I select the previous quantize operation. Now, one of the beauties of macros is that you can define keyboard shortcuts for them. So this delete loose doubles macro, when we move up to our macros page, is here. And as you can see, I've set a keyboard shortcut for it. So now when I press Control O, that operation is going to get performed. Here we go. And there's the note disappeared. Now, it must be said that the one kind of potential flaw in this is that it's arbitrary as to which note will be selected. Because when the delete operation was performed, both of those MIDI notes were considered to be identical. Cubase happens to have selected the one that was slightly in front of the bar. That's absolutely fine. I've got no problem with that at all. So that's an example of a really complex logical operation that I want to perform on everything. There are no conditions here. I've performed that operation on the entire part. That's why it's defined as a macro. Let's have a look at another example. Duplicate selected tracks without data. Another thing that I perform pretty much every day. This is a really, really common macro. So what I want to do here is duplicate this groove agent track, but I don't want any of the data. I don't want the automation data. I don't want the MIDI data, but I do want the instance of the instrument and the track name, and basically everything associated with the track, but none of the notes. So I'm going to duplicate the track. That's step one. Then I'm going to delete the automation of the selected track. This is a cleanup operation. I very rarely use track versions, but if I did have track versions in the original track, they would all get deleted here. Then I'm selecting everything on the track, all of the data, and then finally deleting it all. Once again, I've got a keyboard shortcut set up for this. So here's my selected track. And here's my new track, completely clean, no automation, good to go. For my third example, I'm going to show you how to build a macro from scratch. And I'm going to recreate the snap locators to song position macro. So I'm not going to show you how this one works yet. I'm going to rebuild it completely from scratch. But I'll show you the principle. Just zoom out a little bit. I'm going to put my song marker at 9.5, then click my keyboard shortcut. And now it's wrapped the locators around basically the bar preceding and succeeding wherever my cursor happens to be. So now I'm going to delete this macro and build it from scratch. Gone. Okay, let's create a new macro. I'm going to call it snap locators to song position. Okay. And then I'm going to add commands to it. Now you don't click the add command. If I click the add command now, it's going to add whatever happens to be selected in the box up above. Don't want that. Let's get rid of it again. The first action I'm going to perform is to set a marker wherever my current song locator is. And I'm going to use marker number 1. I don't actually use marker number 1. If you follow any of my videos, you'd know why. But basically, it's all to do with locators. So marker 1 is completely available for automated use, and this is one of the functions it performs. So I'm going to add that command to the snap locators to song position, set marker 1. So this marker that you can currently see here, I'll just close the key commands down for a moment. That actually is marker number 1. Just move it out of the way so that when we come to execute this command, you'll actually see all of this get performed back in. So now I choose my macro again. I'm going to carry on rebuilding this macro. You can't record macros, by the way. In some applications, you might be used to pressing record and then performing operations inside the application and then click stop. You can't do that in Cubase. You've got to build them manually, which is unfortunate. Now what I'm going to do is take the transport marker, basically wherever the song position currently is, and nudge it back to the nearest bar. And there's a function called nudge -1 bar. Let's add that command. So now we're kind of building up a picture of what's going to be happening. This song marker is now going to get moved back to the beginning of bar number 9. The next thing I want to do is set the locator to bar 9. So Set left locator to project cursor position. Excellent. Let's add that. Now I want to move the song marker forwards 1 bar. Nudge +1. Set the right locator to project cursor position. Do that. And then finally, remember that marker we created at the beginning? We set the marker at wherever the song position is. So now we can go to marker 1. Add that. And that is our macro. Let's say OK. So I'm now going to set the locators somewhere random. Set my song position to 9.5. Go back into my macros because I've just remembered that when I clicked delete earlier, I lost my keyboard shortcut, which is Shift B, assign. And now when I click Shift B, marker number 1 has been moved to the song position and the locators have been placed in the right position. So wherever my song marker is, Shift B jumps me straight there, puts the locators around it. If we scroll up to Process Project Logical Editor, you can see all of the commands here, and these are all usable commands inside the macros, just in the same way that when we were adding those pre and post commands in the Project Logical Editor, you've got macros to choose from. When you're building macros, you can add those processes to your macros as well, so they're really flexible. Basically, there's an almost infinite range of options for you to choose from here. One final thing I forgot to mention when we were dealing with these loose doubles, there is actually one logical flaw inside this macro. If you choose to download this thing or build it yourself and execute it, it doesn't work if soft quantize is on, because soft quantize moves things like towards the bar, but not exactly on the bar. And unfortunately, there's no key command in Cubase to explicitly activate or deactivate soft quantize. There's only a toggle operation, and that's no good for me. So if I'm ever going to operate delete loose doubles, I know that I need to disable soft quantize first. Sometimes I forget and I think, hang on a minute, that didn't work. Why didn't it work? And then about 3 seconds later, I remember I need to turn soft quantize off. And that'll do us for today. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Please hit like if you did. I'll see you again.